And that's the purpose that Allah revealed the Quran for. It astonishes me. I find it extremely difficult to comprehend that we have been Muslims all our lives. We've been reading the Quran or hearing the Quran. We hear it in the salawat. And we have, perhaps the majority of us do not have the slightest idea what Allah Azza wa Jal is saying to us. We do not even have the slightest curiosity to even find out what Allah Azza wa Jal is saying to us in the Quran, when we know that our salvation is in the Quran and our guidance is in the Quran and it's our methodology of life, and by following it we're going to attain paradise, and by following and staying away from that which it prohibits we will be saved from the hellfire. And then I don't make the effort to understand what Allah is saying to me. I find that strange. I find it really difficult to understand. Because the language of the Quran, Arabic, is the language of the Muslims. And Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala revealed the Quran in the Arabic language. Therefore, we need to make an effort to understand the Quran in its language, our language, Arabic, as Muslims. Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, rahimahullah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, he says that I am amazed how a Muslim can recite the book of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, and due to not understanding it, he doesn't taste the sweetness of the Quran, how sweet it is in its actual language when you understand it. Because when you understand the Quran in its actual language, you will unlock a whole different realm, a whole different universe that you did not have access to by understanding what Allah Jalla fi'ula is saying to you. It will give you comfort, it will give you happiness, you will attain success and goodness that you're seeking by understanding the book of Allah Azza wa Jal and implementing it. Now look at this, ayyuha al-kiram. The Quran, it's a book that Allah revealed would change the face of the universe. I just told you how the Quran can affect you when you understand it. But the effect of the Quran is not limited to only when you understand it. Even when you do not understand the Quran affects you. It has a great impact on you, because the Quran was revealed to address the hearts, and the hearts, they recognize the Quran and they are affected by the Quran when they are sound hearts. When the Sahaba radiallahu anhum ardahum, they migrated from Mecca to Habasha to Abyssinia, and they went to An-Najashi, and then Quraysh, they sent Amr ibn As to bring back the Sahaba to Mecca. Then they were brought in front of An-Najashi, and then Amr ibn As radiallahu anhu, before he was Muslim, he said to An-Najashi that these people, they say blasphemous things about Isa ibn Maryam alayhi salam, because you know our belief is different to the Christians' belief, and An-Najashi was a Christian. So Amr thought that perhaps this is the way that he can convince Najashi to send them back to Mecca. However, An-Najashi asked Ja'far radiallahu anhu, what is it that you say about Isa alayhi salam? And then Ja'far responded with his speech, no, with Kalamullah, the speech of Allah. Now, bear this in mind. An-Najashi, he's not an Arab, he doesn't speak Arabic, he doesn't understand Arabic. He's speaking to Ja'far through an interpreter, a translator. Ja'far radiallahu anhu arda, he starts to recite Surah Maryam. And then in these verses, Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala talks about Isa alayhi salam, and what Isa alayhi salam says about himself. قال إني عبد الله آتاني الكتاب وجعلني نبيا وجعلني مباركا أينما كنت وأوصاني بالصلاة والزكاة ما دمت حيا وبرا بوالدتي ولم يجعلني جبارا شقيا والسلام علي يوم ولدت ويوم أموت ويوم أبعث حيا ذلك عيسى ابن مريم قول الحق الذي فيه يمترون ما كان لله أن يتخذ من ولد سبحانه إذا قضى أمرا فإنما يقول له كن فيكون وإن الله ربي وربكم فاعبدوه هذا صراط مستقيم. recited these ayat in Arabic. Najashi is hearing it that Isa alayhi salam, he said, I am the slave of Allah Azza wa Jal. He granted me the scripture and He made me a prophet and He made me blessed wherever I am. And He advised me and commanded me to establish the prayer and give zakah as long as I live, and to be dutiful and good to my mother. And He never made me one who is miserable and evil. And then He says, peace be upon me the day that I was born, the day that I die, and the day I'm resurrected. This is Isa ibn Maryam, the matter that they dispute regarding. It's not befitting for Allah Azza wa Jalla to take a son. Exalted is Allah. If He decrees a matter and if He decides a matter, He says to it, be, and it shall be. And Allah is my Lord and your Lord, so worship Him. This is the straight path. Najashi, he hears the verses. Some narrations, they say that as soon as he heard the verses, and Najashi started to cry and weep, to the extent that his beard became moist due to his tears. And this is perhaps prior to even knowing the meaning of these verses. And after he's told the meaning of these verses, he says that we believe regarding Isa the exact same thing that you believe, even though that's not what they believe. And his priests were upset with that statement, but because of the effect of the Quran, that's how he was impacted. So imagine when you understand the book of Allah Ta'ala, and then you see that as well. When the Prophet ﷺ was in Medina, and Quraysh, they had fought the battle of Badr with the Prophet ﷺ, and a lot of their leaders had been killed in that battle. There was a man known as Jubair al-Mut'im. He lost his relatives and his uncles and so on in the battle of Badr. He had this great hatred towards the Prophet ﷺ. He came to Al-Madinah with ill intentions towards the Prophet ﷺ. Perhaps he wanted to harm him. And then he came at a time the Prophet ﷺ was praying Salat al-Maghrib, and he was reciting Surah al-Tur. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. وَالطُّورِ وَكِتَابٍ مَسْطُورٍ في رق منشور والبيت المعمور والسقف المرفوع والبحر المسجور إن عذاب ربك لواقع ما له من دافع يوم تمور السماء مورا وتسير الجبال سيرا فويل يومئذ للمكذبين. And the Prophet ﷺ kept reciting until he got towards the end of the surah. أم تأمرهم أحلامهم بهذا أم هم قوم طاغون أم يقولون تقوله بل لا يؤمنون فليأتوا بحديث مثله إن كانوا صادقين أم خلقوا من غير شيء أم هم الخالقون أم خلقوا السماوات والأرض بل لا يوقنون أم عندهم خزائن ربك أم هم المسيطرون أم لهم سلم يستمعون فيه فليأت مستمعهم بسلطان مبين. Until he completed the surah. But this man Jubair is listening to the Prophet ﷺ recite these ayat. When he got to these ayat, were they created from nothing? أم خلقوا من غير شيء. Were they created from nothing? أم هم الخالقون. Or are they the creators? أم خلقوا السماوات والأرض. Or did they create the heavens and the earth, the universe? بل لا يوقنون. Rather they're not certain. Jubair, he says, كاد قلبي أن يطير. My heart almost flew out of my chest. He went from an enemy of Islam to one who loves Islam. As soon as the Prophet ﷺ finished his salah, he went to him and he embraced Islam. He went from one having ill intentions towards the Prophet ﷺ and hatred towards him, then from that to loving him, loving Islam. All of that is because of the effect of the Quran. He understood it. But look at this, Ayyuha al-Kiram. The Prophet ﷺ, when he was in Mecca, amongst Quraysh, he went by the Kaaba and he stood by the Kaaba and he started reciting Surah Al-Najm out loud. All of Quraysh can hear and the Sahaba can hear and they're listening attentively. And the Prophet ﷺ kept reciting until he got towards the end of the surah. هذا نذير من النذر الأولى أزفت الآزفة ليس لها من دون الله كاشفة أفمن هذا الحديث تعجبون وتضحكون ولا تبكون وأنتم سامدون فاسجدوا لله واعبدوا. He got to the last ayah. Prostrate to Allah and worship Him. The Prophet ﷺ went to sujood. The Sahaba went to sujood. And all of the disbelievers of Quraysh, they went to sujood prostrated. Why? Because the Quran has satwa. It overpowers you. It will make your limbs submit. That is the power and the effect of the Quran. Even when you do not understand it. Therefore, I need to become one who tries to attain all these blessings and the goodness of the Quran by becoming a companion of the Quran. Learn the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. Learn to recite it correctly. Understand it. Implement it. Find someone to teach you the Quran. Be a friend of the Quran so the Quran can be a loyal friend to you that defends you Yawm al-Qiyamah. Do that and you'll be amongst those who Allah Azza wa Jal will honor. And it will be said to those individuals, يُقَالُ لِصَاحِبِ الْقُرْآنِ اقْرَأْ وَارْتَقِ وَرَتِّلْ كَمَا كُنْتَ تُرَتِّلُ فِي الدُّنْيَا فَإِنَّ مَنْزِلَتَكَ عِنْدَ آخِرِ آيَةٍ تَقْرَأُهَا. It will be said to Sahib al-Quran, the companion of the Quran. You were a friend of the Quran. It will be said to that individual on the Day of Judgment, read and rise, ascend and recite like you used to recite in this world. The condition is that you used to recite it in this world. And your position in the Akhirah, in Jannah, will be by the last ayah that you recite. The ulama, when they explain this hadith, they say that this hadith is not only exclusive to those who have memorized the Quran. Memorizing the Quran is important and it's extremely virtuous and it's extremely encouraged. But if someone did not have the ability to memorize the Quran and they were not able to attain that great virtue, they won't be excluded from this hadith with a condition that they are a friend of the Quran, they are a companion of the Quran who recites the Quran regularly, acts upon it and lives by it, by the guidance of the Quran. You can also attain that virtue. That's fadlullah, that's the bounties of Allah Azza wa Jalla, are vast. Rather, Ibn Qayyim, rahimahullah tabarak wa ta'ala, when he tells us about the people of Allah Azza wa Jalla, as the Prophet ﷺ told us that Allah has special people. Allah has special people chosen for all of mankind. Who are these people? Ahlul Quran, hum ahlullahi wa khasatuh. The people of the Quran, they are the people of Allah and His elite ones. What makes you from Ahlul Quran? Ibn Qayyim tells you. He says, Ahlul Quran, humul amiluna bihi wa law lam yahfazuhu. He says the people of the Quran are those who act upon it, they live by it, even if they did not memorize it, if they didn't have the ability to memorize it, or they are not able to memorize it. Memorizing is essential. Memorizing the Quran makes it easier to act upon it. That's what you should do. But if someone, for whatever reason, they were not able to do so and they had an excuse, They can still be from Ahlul Quran if they live by the Quran. That is the criteria. Acting upon the Quran. Rather, Anas ibn Malik, radiallahu anhu ardah, he would say, رُبَّ قَارِئٍ لِلْقُرْآنِ وَالْقُرْآنُ يَلْعَنُهُ. Perhaps an individual would recite the Quran and the Quran is cursing him. How is that possible? You're reading the book of Allah Azza wa Jal and the Quran is cursing you? It's possible. And this is how it's possible. You read the Quran, you're regularly reciting it, perhaps you memorized it, you come across an ayah where Allah tells you to do an obligation, you completely abandon it. You come across an ayah where Allah tells you to stay away from something haram, you do it as if it's okay, and you live your life like that, completely contradicting the message of the Quran. That individual, he recites the Quran, he knows what the Quran is saying to him, but because he doesn't act upon it, he neglects the teachings of the Quran is cursing him. That's why the Prophet ﷺ, he said to us, وَالْقُرْآنُ حُجَّةٌ لَكَ أَوْ عَلَيْكَ. The Quran will be an evidence for you or against you. We ask Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala to make us from the people of the Quran, the elite people of Allah Azza wa Jal. We ask Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala to forgive our sins. We ask Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala to have mercy upon us. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to guide us and to increase us in guidance and to guide others through us. We ask Allah to make us from those who said to read and rise and ascend and recite like you used to recite in this dunya, and your position in Jannah will be by the last verse that you recite. We ask Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala to forgive us and our parents and to have mercy upon us and our parents and to make us from those who are dutiful to their parents. And we ask Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala to grant us taqwa and to accept our deeds. And we ask Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala to grant us sincerity in our statements and actions. And we ask Allah Jalla fi'ula to protect us from His anger and His wrath. And we ask Allah to grant us His pleasure and His reward. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jal, just like He gathered us all here this evening, that He gathers us in Jannah al-Firdaus al-A'la without any previous punishment or any difficult account. إنه لذلك القادر عليه. صلى الله وسلم وبارك على النبي محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خير. Blessings so attentively.